Senator Cantwell, you're recognized for your
Thank you,
questions.
Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank you and Senator Fisher for both being stalwarts in getting this hearing done. I think this is the third hearing we've had on supply chain, so we very much appreciate it, and appreciate all the witnesses being here today to talk about this important issue. I don't know if any of you caught Fareed Zakaria's discussion a couple of weeks ago about supply chain and the Infrastructure Investment Act. I thought it was great, and I'll submit this to the record if I can.
Without objection, will
But
be entered.
basically, he was talking about the percentage of infrastructure investment as it relates to GDP and how we had fallen off getting to less than 1% down to 0.7%. But obviously, with the infrastructure bill by 2026, we'd get up to 1.3%. So while we're dealing with these phenomenons that Mr. Butler adequately describes in his opening statement about the impacts of being able to order more and import more and the challenges of COVID, we also have to keep in mind that we have to make significant infrastructure investments. So I think you would all agree that that was a good thing that we made these infrastructure investments, and now that we have to get them actually implemented. Is that correct? That you think that this helps immensely in changing the picture here?
Yes, absolutely.
No argument.
Okay, so now we're talking about new patterns in addition to this very historic pattern of underinvesting in infrastructure. And I say this coming from a big trading state, so obviously we are exporters and importers, but we, a lot of our products, practically every sector is, an international, more than half of the businesses. If you're talking about Washington wheat, 90% of it is exported. If you're talking about our other agricultural products, it's export. If you talk about airplanes, the markets are exports. So we care about both, but I'm interested in following on the discussion about the congestion that is occurring at the ports. And Mr. Butler, you mentioned some of the innovation that is occurring to try to temporarily move these containers to other locations. What else should we be doing to try to expedite that? And what should we be doing? I'm not so sure how much discussion has happened on the rail side this morning, because obviously the price of rail affects this issue as well. And a few years ago, we had really exacerbated problems of ag product not even being able to get onto the rail because oil was pushing it off. So what do we need to do to help get more innovation and moving congestion out of the ports on these containers? And what do we need to do to think about rail? And maybe Mr. Reagan or Mr. Doyle, you can answer that.
Chair Cantwell, you've hit the nail on the head, which is that our ports are the interface with the sea, and that is the most valuable commercial real estate in our country, and it is limited in terms of space. We know in many of these ports there's not much room to grow physically, so we have to use that space as efficiently as possible. And to the extent that we can move some of that activity off of the terminals, that provides a buffer that keeps things moving. And that's essentially what we're trying to do right now in Southern California. There's a big push in both directions. One is to get importers to pick up their cargo and find someplace else to put it, which is a real challenge for them in many cases. So I'm not pointing fingers, but that has to happen.
Because the warehouses are stacked too.
Correct.
Okay, so this is, the problem is, we're importing a lot in general. And your testimony specifies why that is, because we're making it easier for people to do that too.
Right, and so, but the port, if you will, is the commons for everybody that imports and exports. So if somebody has a warehouse space problem, if that impacts every other user of that port, that's not the best solution. Really, we have to, and this is what I mentioned in my opening statement, is that this is new. We have saturation throughout the entire land side of the supply chain. We really haven't seen that before. So we're working through this in a way for the first time. So all those pieces have to fall together at the same time. And at the same time, we're getting lots of pressure, and rightly so, from the administration and others to move out empty containers, right? Because they get in the way as well. If you have too many empties piled up on the port, then that stops imports and exports. I mentioned earlier, one of the things I'm concerned about and would like to work with the committee and the staff on the new legislation is to make sure that we end up with legislation that recognizes that we have to both move exports and reposition empties. It's
Yep.
two sides of the same coin.
Listen, we were very involved in getting new federal freight legislation. We said freight can't wait, so maybe the new motto is empties have to be moved. So we got to get them somewhere else. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll take for the record, if I could, Mr. Reagan, because I see our colleagues waiting. We have to get to a vote on that about the rail. I'm very serious about the rail part of this equation because I do think that also affects people. When the rail prices are so high, people don't move the product. They'd rather sit there and wait for another route. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Cantwell. Senator Lee, you are recognized for your questions.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for holding this hearing.